Welcome to Alpha Insights. I'm Asher. Today we've got Ryan with us to sift through the big policy moves that are reshaping the cannabis sector this weekend. Remember, if you have questions as we go, you can ask us at stockalpha.ai. Quick note up front. US stock markets were closed on Saturday, June 20th. The last trading day was Thursday, June 18th, and markets reopen on Monday, June 22nd. So we're talking about headlines and implications heading into the long weekend, not intraday price moves.
Thanks, Asher. Great to be here. Lots to unpack. Federal rulemaking, a Supreme Court decision, and even more attention on psychedelics research. These are the kinds of stories that change the backdrop for the whole industry.
Let's start big. What happened on the federal front that investors should be watching?
The most consequential update was the Drug Enforcement Administration moving the process into a formal rescheduling hearing. An administrative law judge issued a procedural order that sets timelines and lays out who can file what evidence. So, the real question here is, this opens a window where legal and scientific arguments get aired on the record, and that can produce much clearer guidance about scheduling, research access, and enforcement priorities. Right. What matters for companies is that clearer federal signals reduce a kind of long-running uncertainty that has scared away some institutional capital and complicated national expansion plans. Analysts note the hearing itself doesn't automatically change scheduling, but it creates a higher resolution process that markets and strategists can parse.
There was also a Supreme Court ruling in the mix. Give us the short version and why it matters.
Sure. The Supreme Court handed down a unanimous decision that, in effect, prevents federal law from categorically blocking firearm possession by people who use cannabis. That 9-0 ruling narrows a big federal compliance overhang that retailers and operators have been dealing with, especially in states where cannabis is legal. It doesn't settle the federal scheduling issue, but it does remove one layer of legal risk for consumers and businesses.
Interesting. So less of that looming compliance cloud, but still work to do on scheduling. What about psychedelics? I heard the Department of Defense got involved.
Yes. Bipartisan lawmakers filed an amendment to extend a Defense Department psychedelics research program for 6 more years, through 2033. I mean, when you look at the data, continued public funding and defense-linked research can accelerate clinical programs and lab capacity. At the same time, reporting shows a growing gray market for MDMA gummies and DMT vapes, so there's both regulated research momentum and some messy consumer-side adoption to watch.
That split, regulated research versus gray market products, sounds like both opportunity and risk.
Exactly. Honestly, I was a bit surprised by this one. The research funding horizon gives companies and labs a runway to plan clinical programs, which could eventually translate into new commercial pathways. But unregulated products raise safety, enforcement, and reputational risk that could trigger crackdowns or stricter state rules.
State-level policy was also active, right? Any examples investors should keep an eye on?
Yes, several states are moving in different directions. Kentucky rescinded an earlier order that had allowed out-of-state access to medical cannabis, which is a reminder that access can be rolled back. And in Virginia, there's a fight over raising public consumption fines from the current $25 civil penalty as sales legalization heads to a vote next week. Those kinds of state-level shifts show that even with federal momentum, the landscape remains a patchwork. So for investors, the practical watch list includes the DEA hearing filings and timelines, any Department of Justice or agency memos that follow the Supreme Court decision, Virginia's vote and consumption fine debate, and state actions like Kentucky's rollback. Also keep an eye on how defense and academic funding for psychedelics unfolds over the next 12 to 36 months.
And what about market names and funds? Which names tend to react to these kinds of headlines?
Sector ETFs and large multi-state operators are typically sensitive to regulatory news. Watch the MSOS Cannabis ETF, and companies like Trulieve, Green Thumb Industries, Curaleaf, and Tilray brands. Analysts note these names often show volatility as regulatory headlines get priced in, so expect activity when markets reopen on Monday, June 22nd. But to be clear, this is analysis, not a recommendation.
Short reactions. Right. Interesting.
A quick risk note. Monitor compliance programs, licensing timelines, and state rulemaking. Data suggests momentum is returning to parts of the sector, but timing and implementation will vary widely across companies and states. This is informational only and not personal investment advice. Analysts and legal teams will be parsing filings for weeks.
Before we go, give our listeners 2 or 3 quick, practical takeaways they can use heading into next week.
Sure. 1. Watch the DEA hearing docket. Filings and timelines will be the primary short-term catalyst. 2. Follow the fallout from the Supreme Court decision and any agency memos that clarify enforcement, because that reduces a key compliance overhang. 3. Track state-level votes and rollbacks, and keep an eye on research funding for psychedelics as a possible adjacent growth runway. Again, this is market analysis, not personal advice.
Great. Solid, actionable framework. Thanks, Ryan. And listeners, if you have questions about anything we discussed today, you can ask us directly at stockalpha.ai. We answer listener questions live. And for more market insights, head over to stockalpha.ai. Catch you next time on Alpha Insights.